so glad to be here. I would rather stand out here and just kind of walk around, but I broke my foot recently, so I'm gonna just lean here. I'm fine. It's a message from the cosmos that I must wear high heels at all times. That's what this is about, because I was not wearing heels when I broke my foot, so clearly I know what I need to do going forward. No question about it. So anyway, Height is a tough act to follow. I have learned so much from her. She is just one of the most amazing people I have ever met. And she touched on something that is incredibly important, and that is belonging. And it's something I wasn't even going to mention, but I think it really holds true, and I am a personal example of it. I feel that if I did not have that sense of belonging at Weber Shandwick, I would not have been able to create the job I have. It was what I wanted to do. The role did not exist. But I felt strongly enough that people, the management there, would accept what I wanted to do, that I just said, raised my hand and wrote probably 25 endless memos about what we should be doing. But after everybody got sick of reading what I wrote, they said, would you like to do this? And I said, yeah. So here we are years later, and I couldn't be happier. So I do believe that that sense of authenticity and feeling that you can ask for what you want is incredibly important. I so echo that. As we know, today's political and cultural state is just so divisive. It is so profoundly segmented that it has really ignited increased urgency under one of the most important issues facing our country and our industry today, and that is diversity, equity, and inclusion. D&I in public relations has always lagged far behind the changing demographics of our stakeholders. Acknowledging the problem and putting it on our to-do list for some time in the future when we didn't have so many other pressing things to do and the moon was in Aquarius and what have you, was basically seen as acceptable for many years. Nobody admitted it, but that was what was done. Everybody just kind of kicked the can down the road for the future. Advocating for diversity of thought, which quite frankly is a phrase that often makes me want to tear my hair out, was the industry's way for a long time of acknowledging the need for diversity without actually having to do anything about it. Just like, yep, there's a problem. But you know, how do we get diversity of thought? With diversity of people. That's kind of how it happens. So at this point, and not a moment too soon, the industry is actually developing a bias toward action as opposed to a bias toward talk. And to me, this is like a gift from God. It is an amazing and wonderful thing. So as far as I'm concerned, at long last, we are really owning the obligation and the opportunity to cast as wide a net as possible for talent, to leverage the differing backgrounds and perspectives that people bring to the table to create innovative solutions for our communications issues, and to create inspiring, high-performance workplaces where everyone feels welcome, everyone's voice is heard, and everyone has an equal opportunity to contribute, to advance, and to grow. Our lack of diversity in this business is not intentional, clearly, but it is far from harmless. And so this barriers to diverse workforce development exist. They have to be identified, they have to be examined, and then they have to be shattered. And so that is one of the reasons we're here, to get started on this process in a serious way. And so my esteemed colleagues on this panel are here to help start this process. So you've heard a little bit about them and what they do. You've heard a little bit about me. What you have not heard is that in addition to my work at Weber Shandwick, I also am president of New York Women in Communications, which exists to advance the careers of women in every marketing communications discipline at every stage of their career. And I'm also president of the PRSA Foundation, which drives diversity and inclusion from a racial and ethnic perspective within the public relations arena. And as you may have heard, we recently published a groundbreaking book called Diverse Voices, Profiles in Leadership. And I am so proud of it and so happy to be working with Ron Culp and others on this board that created this project. It consists of interviews with about 45 mostly senior people of color throughout the public relations industry, including CCOs of Johnson & Johnson and Lenovo and other companies. And the idea is that the people profiled in the book, and Kim Hunter, who is sitting right here, the people profiled in the book really talk about their career journeys. They talk about their successes, also about some of the obstacles that they have run into because they are multicultural people in a largely, let's say, breathtakingly homogeneous business, because that is the way it is. And the idea of the book is to provide several things. One is to provide guidance and hope for young people, for students and young professionals who would follow in these senior leaders' footsteps. Also to provide PR educators with information about the history and contributions of diverse people within the PR space. And also to provide organizations with real concrete ideas for building inclusive organizations where people from all backgrounds can thrive. So I'm truly proud of it, and I'm very glad to talk with you about it, and just wanted you to know that you can go to diverseleadership.net or Amazon to find this book, and I, of course, highly recommend it. Not that I'm the least bit biased. But now that we've gotten that done, I want to start talking with our panel about what the barriers to diversity and inclusion in the industry are. So let's start with barriers to recruitment, hiring, retention, and promotions. These barriers exist for marginalized groups at several levels, starting from internships and really going all the way up through senior levels. Could you elaborate on some of the specific obstacles you've observed at one or more of these career stages? And I know, Lilia, you have a particularly strong POV on this one.
Yes, for sure. So good morning, everybody. Lilia, really excited to be here. And just to build a little bit on what Judith was talking about, clearly I'm here, it's a passion point of mine. I'm on the National Board of Directors for ASE, which is the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement. And I feel that I am in great company today. I feel like there's a lot of people, Judith, Heidi, who have been pioneers in this space. We're actually the ones that are making the traction and are opening the door for future advancements and innovations and really getting multicultural talent. We're giving them the spotlight. I mean, we're really opening those doors. So to answer your first question, the way that I thought about this is more holistically. There's clearly challenges and barriers across all specific phases, right? From coming in as an intern to entry level, mid-level, and then higher. I thought about the barriers that kind of go across all stages for people of color. And I want to start off just with the fact, let's just be real. There's still a lot of politics in play at workplaces. So let's just start with where people recruit from, right? There's a lot of places that still go to the same well. They're going to the same universities, the same colleges, and a lot of times it's because that's where the C-suite attended themselves. And a lot of times, there's just not a lot of multicultural students to recruit from those particular schools. Secondly, from a political standpoint, as internships, I'm sure in all organizations, there's a limited number of interns that you can bring in. And then you've got the political factor of like, well, the client's son would like the internship. The COO's neighbor would like the internship. It's just the reality, right? That's barrier number one. I also think a second barrier is more operational, and this is financial. And it's a reality, again, that we have to deal with. When you want to open a new position, you've got to go through a lot of financial red tape. The CFO is right there chatting with you. And a lot of times you cannot fill a spot, I'm sure all of you can relate, until the scope of work is signed, right? Well, guess what happens when that scope of work is signed? The work comes in immediately, and the team that you have is not enough, right? So everybody's feeling pressure, and then the line, when you finally get to start hiring and pipelining, they got to come in and hit the ground running. So again, our industry just does not have a lot of multicultural talent inherently in it. So what we need to do if we want to bring in multicultural is go to other industries. You cannot expect people to come in and hit the ground running. They've got to learn the processes. They've got to learn what the work is all about, what their expectations are. And unfortunately, that time isn't allowed. I've seen this happen multiple times at different places. What happens is you will bring in someone and everyone's like, yay, we've got a multicultural person, an employee. They're not set up to succeed. And at the end of the day, it's sad to say, but I've seen it time and time again, the person gets fired because, well, they just weren't meeting the criteria of the work. So that's the financial challenge. I also think, just as you start thinking about getting promoted to different levels, one of the key things is a cultural aspect. So I'm Mexican American, and there is two cultures that I think about, an ask culture and a guess culture. The ask culture is very American. You kind of grow up with the expectation that you will ask for what you want. It doesn't mean you're going to get it, but you are expected to ask. I'm Mexican American. The culture is very much more of a guess culture. So you don't necessarily ask for it. What you do is you do your very best, and then good things come to those who do their very best, but you don't ask for it. And my parents, amazing people, wonderful people, love them, the best intentions, immigrants, right, factory workers, gave me the best advice that they could. They said, when I started, they said, put your head down, do a great job, work hard, and you will get promoted. It took me a while to get in there and then realize, like, oh, wait, I got to ask for what I want. And I still feel uncomfortable this day. I really got to prepare myself to do that. But culturally, I think, Latino, I've had conversations with my Korean friends, very much guess culture. So you've got to figure out, how do I ask for what I want to move on? So part of that is that. And then the last barrier that I thought about, and it's something that multicultural people in general have a hard time doing, is finding advocates, right? To navigate kind of your way, you've got to find people that are in those closed door rooms, right? Where they're talking about promotions, where they're talking about layoffs. And you need to have people in there banging on the table for you as a multicultural employee. I think it was Heidi who said this morning about how the likelihood of you getting up to more senior levels, and it gets slimmer and slimmer. If you're a white man, it's a lot higher. If you're a white woman, it's a lot lower, but still higher than for multicultural people. And that is a very, very true thing. And what happens, I saw a study, I think it was from the Center of Work-Life Policy, done a couple of years ago. And it was about that gap of, as you get more senior, the proportion of men to women goes like you start at the same level, entry level, 50% male, 50% female at entry level roles. And then what starts happening is the male percentage goes up as you get more senior, the women's goes down. I feel like that's very relevant to multicultural as well. And so recognizing that we cannot do it alone. You've got to find those advocates that are going to push for you.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. That was really thorough, and so you gave a lot of information in that answer, and I appreciate it. Wanted to make sure that we got everybody on the panel who wanted to contribute to that. So
I'd like to just add something to that. So I grew up the youngest of 10 kids. And the only, I think someone just said, oh, Jesus. But so growing up the youngest of 10 kids, the first to go to college, we've heard this story before. And I think this is very relevant when it comes to internships. So I didn't have anyone to help me navigate college, nor how to pivot from college to landing a job. So when I graduated, I was a pretty good student and I had a piece of paper, but I didn't know what to do with it. And I think there's so many students of color that find themselves in that same situation. I just, as something very personal to me, have always opened myself up to, if you want to talk to me, then I will put 30 minutes on my calendar to talk to any student that's trying to figure out what to do next. I think what has happened many times is that I get calls from moms and aunts and all of that, and they're like, Tonya, can you talk to my daughter or my son because they're in the process of graduating from college? And I meet with them and I realize they have no idea what to do, and it's almost too late, because they are in their last year of school. And as we all know, this is an internship game to a certain level, right? And so one of the things I took upon myself is my office is in Fort Worth, close to Dallas. And I called a lot of my colleagues from Flashman Hillard, some of the big guys, and I said, hey, here's a problem. I'd love to host a internship boot camp. Actually, I got the idea from another agency in Boston and said, hey, I called the CFO and said, can you talk me through what you all did? So what we do now is we identify minority students that are freshmen and sophomores, and we're very intentional that they haven't quite gotten to that spot. And I have a day-long panel discussion, and then what I do is I invite a lot of my colleagues to come in and do mock interviews. And we talk to them about the process, right? So this is what you should be doing, and I keep tabs on them of how things are going, and when they get to that junior year or senior year, then they have a better idea of what they need to do. So I think that's one of the barriers, right? Depending on where you are, of not understanding how to even get into the industry, even though you know you want to do it, but how do I get into this industry? I think the other thing is, and Pat Ford and I have had this conversation before, is the importance of having a sponsor. To me, having a mentor is different than having a sponsor. So, and it took me a while. It took me several years within my career to realize that what I really needed in my career, I need mentors, and I have lots of them, but what I really needed in my career was a sponsor. Someone who's going to be at the table and a topic comes up about, we're looking for a multicultural agency, or we're looking to ask someone to come and speak to an organization, and that person says, oh, I know someone, right? That's the difference, and they then help me get through the door. To me, that's the difference between me calling my mentor and he giving me good advice on what I should do next, or me calling my sponsor and my sponsor saying, oh, I hear what you're trying to do, let me make some phone calls.
That's
and
hugely important.
And I think as you get into various levels of being an executive, I think what we need more is more sponsors versus more mentors.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure I get to everyone, but I also want to condense this so that we have enough time for all of the questions. So I know, Ken, you had something to say on this, and Brenda as well.
Very briefly, I've been in academe for a longer period of time than I was in the industry. And one of the things I've noticed in academe is we have a preoccupation with skills. And we are constantly told our students need to be able to do this. And ultimately, what they need to be able to do is be a unicorn, right? So they need to be fluent in more than one language. They need to have done study abroad. They need to know business. They need to know media analytics. So we check off all these things that students need to be able to do. And in doing so, we separate students who could be great advocates for the industry because we're putting up so many barriers. And many of those are artificially created. They're well-intentioned. So I'd like to suggest that one of the things we should focus on is not just the skills, but the mindset. The mindset. So if we hear from the industry, if you can tell us what you need and we can train the rest of these skills, that speaks to mindset. And that's where I think we can really get some of these great students who have been pushed out and they're now in business or they're in some other area. So in addition to the skills, let's also talk about that mindset and these great multicultural students who are waiting for the opportunity because they do have that mindset. They are ready to hit the ground running, and they will learn quickly. They need that opportunity.
That's a great point. Thank you. Brenda?
Quickly, unpaid internships are a huge issue, and I wish we could convince every place looking for an intern to pay them, because that automatically shuts out a lot of different students. And in many cases, the work product, they do produce work product, and if they do that, it is illegal not to pay them. So I've had many conversations with agencies and corporations and tried to get them to understand that is critical.
Frankly, I'm shocked that that's still going on. I find it disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's we shouldn't even be having this conversation in 2018. And so from my perspective, if any organization asks you for interns and is not willing to pay, bye-bye. It's not even worth the conversation. It's really not. So moving right along. You can see I'm a tad passionate about that. That's just ridiculous. Anyway, as we've been talking about, an inclusive organizational culture is really essential to creating a diverse workforce. As I have always said, diversity without inclusion is absolutely meaningless. It does nothing for the workforce that you are trying to bring in the door. It doesn't really enable you to leverage their different experiences and backgrounds to look for solutions for your communications problems because you're not listening to them. So what happens is that we have this constant revolving door of diverse talent in this industry. And I attribute a large part of that to our not understanding, or at least not executing well, on creating inclusive environments. So my question to all of you is, what should companies be doing to create these environments in which diverse talent and people from every background can thrive? And it's not sort of like a cliquish sort of thing where everyone, as Haida was saying, is asked to come in and assimilate and be just like us. The idea is for us to bring people in and listen to them. How do we do that?
Well, I think in the research I've done, one of the things that often is missing is that the CEO and top management do not make a strong commitment. And when that doesn't happen, you can do every kind of program you can think of. But people sense that that's not really a priority, and it just doesn't happen.
Good point. Tonya, I know you had something on that too.
I think for me, the one word that I think about often is intentional. Being intentional, right? And I think we also have to be very careful that we don't water down diversity and inclusion. And I would add equity into that.
Absolutely.
And what does that really mean, right? And so I think sometimes as a way to be able to convince people that you're actually doing diversity and inclusion, you've added so many other topics to the discussion that we're not really focused on what's really going on in the industry. I can tell you 80% of the time when I'm talking to my colleagues or even clients and they are talking about diversity and inclusion, what they are really concerned about is race equity and the lack thereof in their organization, right? And so I think sometimes what happens is there's many groups that are disenfranchised, but I think we've watered down diversity and inclusion that we've forgotten about what we really need to see happen in our industry. And so I think we need to be intentional and be honest with ourselves.
And when you say we've watered it down, so what should we be focusing on as opposed to what you feel we're focusing on? What do you think?
So for me, and I think I said it, I think if 80% of the people are lacking a diverse, multicultural workforce, then that's what we should be focusing on.
As opposed to diversity of thought.
as opposed to diversity of thought, or all the hazel eyes people need to feel welcomed. And
yes.
So
gotcha.
For me, it really is about if we want to see the needle move, then let's really attack the problem.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
I just had a quick point. I do feel like a lot of the inclusion part is always missed, and I feel a lot of times it's put on the diverse people to actually try to make themselves, right? I kind of feel like I look at senior management across different places that I've been at, and I feel like many of them have never had a multicultural, just an experience. So my thought is, in order to create an inclusive environment, I feel they need to get some cultural experiences.
Yes, indeed.
And so my feeling is that when you're looking, especially when you create management training programs, there should be some elements of culture to build their cultural competency. Because I don't know that they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So I feel like management training programs need to evolve to include a lot more cultural aspects and experiences within those trainings to then really start opening their eyes a bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ken, did you want to say anything on that?
One of the things that I think makes a difference, and this is moving a little bit more to a possible solution, is the need to have these painful conversations and to have them led by capable, competent people who can take some of the workforce or some of the students, whoever we might be talking about, and bring them into the conversation. I think that part is missing, but even if you don't have an especially multicultural work environment, if you're beginning to have those painful conversations and even crowdsourcing, let's talk about why we are the way we are. You know, have those conversations, use your employees, and at some point, of course, conversation is not enough. It does have to move to an action phase. But I would suggest the conversation is the starting point, and let's have people who are leading those conversations, and an important part of that is listening, and listening to the people you do have. So if you're trying to create this culture of belonging, talking to those people and seeing where they are, how they feel, and then making changes.
Absolutely. Nobody asked me, since I'm the moderator, I'll ask myself, Judith, what do you think? So, here's what I think. I think that what we need to do, number one, is to make sure that we are not looking at building diversity, equity, and inclusion as an HR function, because then it's sort of off to the side and it's something that HR will handle and everybody else could just keep doing what they're doing. It does not work that way. So it has to come, the impetus for this has to come from the top, but then you also need to be able to spread engagement throughout the organization, because it's great if the C-suite gets it, you know, and 99 times out of 100 they do, but then the question becomes, how do you filter that down to the people who report to them, and then the people who report to them? And how do you create engagement, meaning that everyone understands that DEI is important for not just the organization, but that it benefits them personally. It benefits them to be part of an organization that has this as a priority. So it's really creating that engagement piece, it's creating education, and it's creating accountability, which Heidi was talking about before. So she mentioned that, you know, she and IPG's leaders have tied senior compensation to diversity and inclusion, but then accountability has to go down the chain as well. So what do we do to make sure that people are accountable for meeting diverse talent outside the organization, developing diverse talent inside the organization, making sure that diversity and inclusion is reflected in the work we do? Because it's great to have, you know, a diverse workforce, but if the work product is not changing, then you're really not accomplishing a whole lot. You know, and so the idea is to make sure that you are not just speaking to multicultural audiences differently, but that you are using Heidi's crowdsourcing point, which is that, you know, the more diverse your group of problem solvers is, the better your solutions will be. You have to think of it, you know, from that perspective as well, so that those perspectives get embedded into the work. That is critical. I've asked myself the question, I have answered it, and we are going to move on. So, next, what are some of the barriers in PR education settings? And this is going to be a multi-part question. Do students from marginalized groups know enough about PR as a career choice? Are the contributions of diverse people throughout the history of public relations incorporated into the curricula? Are faculty diverse enough? How are all of these factors linked to DEI in the industry? Take it away, Brenda and Ken, and then I'll ask others.
I'll start with yes, no, and yes.
All righty.
Well, where to begin? Academic institutions are even slower to change than is industry. They are historically white, and we cannot expect the HBCUs to shoulder the load. So we have to push back at our administrators, and we have to keep pushing for them not to just worry about percentages of students, but about diversity in a lot of other ways. I think we need white students to be champions and to understand these issues, even if often they are resistant. Many of the institutions where I have taught have been enormously proud of the fact that they have 25% students of color, and they clap and they say, "Isn't that great?" And I say, that's a tiny piece, and it's not enough. So I think we need to get white students to wake up, and I think the textbooks, for the most part, are just not even inclusive of the kinds of stories of people who have helped shape this industry in a very meaningful way.
Which is one of the reasons I pushed for the book that I told you about early.
Exactly.
That is really a main reason. People need to know about the contributions of diverse people to this.
And they don't.
Exactly.
At least not to this point.
Yep.
Ken?
I think one of the areas that we struggle with is the recognition that our industry is not widely understood, right? So you were talking about you want to pull your hair out with diversity of thought. For me, my pull my hair out moment, if I had any, was PR needs PR, right? Which is definitely true, but it's a cliche, right? And so students don't have models. You ask a student, name one famous PR practitioner, most of them will come up with the Bernays, the usuals, the white men, right? So there are no models. And so part of what I think we need to be doing is, I like Lilia's example, we need to be a giving culture where we are giving of ourselves. If we are diverse and we're getting out into the community, particularly into high schools, and making an articulation of what we do and what public relations is, so we can at least partially serve as a model. And then secondly, coming back again to this idea of conversation, we need to have civil conversations that are difficult in the classroom so we become models for civility, which is sorely needed in society today. And those are the people who will help affect change because they are able to hold multiple viewpoints, some of them very difficult. Those are the people who will affect change because it forces them to decenter themselves and to look at multiple viewpoints.
Two really, really important points. Getting young people out of high schools. I mean, I've always said if I could snatch people out of kindergarten to come into this business, I would do it. And I say that because, you know, the competition for great grads is intense. And PR as an industry is not known for its breathtakingly generous starting salaries. So there has to be some level of engagement. You want to have emotional engagement as early on as possible so that when students do graduate and have sort of an array of options, they want to be in PR. So starting with high school, absolutely great. And then the need for civility, preaching to the choir. Oh my God, absolutely. So yeah, that would be delightful on multiple fronts.
Yeah. And then I'll just add, you know, I can only really talk from my own experience, but I think that nod of catching them early is really important because the way I landed into this industry is a fluke. Like my parents, you know, what was in their head was, I know doctors make a lot of money, I know engineers make a lot of money, accountants, right? And so I'm the I don't know what I would call myself, like I'm the oddball in my family because all my brothers and sisters are engineers or in medical field. I ended up in advertising and now I'm in PR, and my parents were like, what is that? I couldn't even explain it to them, right?
Same here.
So you gotta catch people early, because I felt forced to go into some other things. I tried them early on. That was not for me. So I think catching students early. I guest lecture now at like University of Chicago and DePaul, my alma mater.
Love it.
And I go in, and this is just my viewpoint. I'm not academic, but I guest lecture from here and there. All my friends who are the instructors, right, who invite me to come in, are Caucasian. The majority of the classes I look around I don't see any diverse faces. It's a big problem. It's a big problem.
Interesting. I think about the pipeline issue, and you know, there are diverse students who are knocking down doors trying to get into the industry. So I see the pipeline issue as more of what we're doing to not bring them in, as opposed to they're not being willing, you know, to come in. I look at it from that perspective. So with that, what I want to do is thank you all for, you know, having such great answers to questions, and I want to open up the floor to the audience to see if any of you have any questions you'd like to ask any or all of us. I see someone there. Speak up, please. Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, my name is Brianna. I'm a PRSSA National Committee member. And I just wanted to know, I know you guys talked a lot from the organizational standpoint, what organizations need to do, but just for students of color, what advice would you give just for being able to break those barriers and going into organizations who have not quite been diversified yet?
Okay, I'll take it. I think, first of all, your being in PRSSA is absolutely great. That is a phenomenal start for you because you can network your way almost anywhere from there. I think that you need to find, you start out with a mentor. You're not going to start with a sponsor, because the sponsor is someone who is going to put themselves and their reputation on the line to support you. At this point in your career, you haven't earned that yet, but you will, presumably at some point, but you can absolutely find mentors. You can do research about organizations to see where they stand on diversity and inclusion. You can look at their senior people and find out sort of what they've talked about, what they think, what they're doing. Really do your homework in terms of selecting the kinds of organizations that you want to be in. Stay with industry organizations. I think that is incredibly helpful. And be open to people and opportunities which can come in the most random ways you could imagine. So always be have your antennae up for opportunities and people who could help you. You know how I became president of New York Women in Communications? I met someone 10 years ago on vacation in Budapest, and we sat at breakfast and talked about our love of Mad Men. Had no idea what New York Women in Communications was. And 10 years later, here I am. She had been a president of the organization before, and she said, oh my God, we have to get you on the board. You just never know. You never know. So just keep that in mind. You're welcome.
Can I just quickly add to that? I know we're, so one of the things I would advise you to do is to also always keep your word. So if you're joining organizations or you're networking and you're meeting with people, if you tell them that you're going to do something or be somewhere, then do and be. I will tell you that every position that I've had, it's because people knew that they can depend on me, right? And so I think that's also important. Network, 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 but keep your word.
Can I wrap it up real quick? So just to build on that point, like make yourself indispensable. I think what people always forget, start with your boss, okay? Make your boss's life easier. Help them out. Like, what can I do to help? It goes so far just to start, right? Make yourself indispensable. And then secondly, what I find and what I recommend to students and, you know, earlier in when you're in entry-level positions is brand yourself. You know, like, write a brand mantra. What are you all about? Like, what are the 3 key things that you need when you leave an impression? What are the 3 things you're going to leave behind? Because that becomes synonymous with you, right? So I highly recommend writing a brand mantra and then like having those 3 things. So when you start networking and you're networking with people, these 3 things rattle off very quickly and you start building your network and people know what to connect you with.
That's great advice. Any other questions?
Yes. Thank you so much, everybody on the panel. I actually have a thought and a question. So I really appreciate all of your comments and all of your insights on the panel. As a diverse person myself, and somebody who's came from HBCU, graduated, and really made a good mark in the industry myself. So this panel is really amazing to be able to hear. Perspective that I wanted to share was just around the last question that you asked, Judith, about how do you try to increase pipelines and get more diverse candidates in the field. Just wanted to just tell you a quick story. In undergrad, a lot of times I went to HBCU, Florida A&M University, and sometimes HBCU fundings are sometimes the budgets of HBCUs are very limited, and the administration and the professors have to be very creative about how they allocate funds to create opportunities for students. And so there are 10 classmates and I, so 11 of us, we wanted to go to a conference in Atlanta. Our dean only had enough money to pay for 2 hotel rooms and one tank of gas. And so me and my classmates, we carpooled and drove at 4 o'clock in the morning and drove up to Atlanta, and we split 2 hotel rooms, so 5 in one room, 6 in another one, because we just had to go to this experience, to this conference in Atlanta, because we knew that our future bosses or our future internships or whatever we needed was going to possibly be in that room. And so just to kind of give a perspective, so a lot of times HBCUs are located in areas that are not popular or are not in like major metropolitan areas. And so we have to get creative on how to get to those opportunities. So one solution I'll be able to offer is maybe sometimes if we can find ways to either bring programming or bring opportunities to spend time at the campus of HBCU, so you can see those diverse candidates, you can see those students who are really passionate and who want to do those things, but a lot of times these students are supporting themselves through school already. They're working 2 or 3 jobs just to have the opportunity to go and get undergraduate education. So any opportunity that there is to cut a cost or provide an opportunity to those students who otherwise would not be able to have that is also awesome opportunity. My question.
Thank you so much for that. That was extraordinary.
Thank you. My question, we were talking about how do you get more diverse candidates in education. So, so even though myself, I've started my career about 2 or 3 years in, but it is a passion of mine to be able to give back to those. So there are more African American men teaching in public relations. I want to understand and get some advice. So what should I be doing in my career now so I can be able to go back and do that and be that person?
Anybody want to take that?
Thanks, Bob.
Brenda, go ahead.
Yeah. As a former department chair, I know I made a point to look for people from underrepresented groups to come as guest speakers and to take part-time faculty positions. And so you need to try that role on and see if you really like it. My hunch is you would. But, you know, people can make so much more in the industry than they can make as a faculty member, even at a full professor level. That's very difficult to attract people to teach from underrepresented groups. And I don't know how to solve that problem, but I know bringing people in, at least on a part-time basis, students get to see people like themselves, see possibilities, and I think that's very important.
So I have colleagues who are just as qualified, if not more qualified than I am, to be in academia and to also get back as a part-time or adjunct faculty member. However, it's like they are already dealing with a lot on their jobs already, just being a diverse talent. And corporations can cut through that red tape that they still, when they get home, they're so exhausted, they don't have anything to give. What is the advice you would give to those young folks who do want to be a part and who do want to give back, but
think they need to find ways to take care of themselves. One of the most important things to me is not work-life balance, which absolutely does not exist. It's it's beyond unicorn level. It's like big. So, but I do think that finding ways to do things for themselves that restore them on a regular basis is critical to their being able to then find the energy to give back to others. If you can't do that, then they're in the position that you're saying they're in, which is that they don't have anything left to give to others. So they have to feel totally justified in giving to themselves, no matter what that means to them. But that's crucial. Absolutely.
Hey, Judith. So I'm James Shackelford. I chair PRSA's National Diversity Inclusion Committee. So thanks, everyone, for the great conversation. I'm curious, because one of the things that we've talked about through PRSA this year has been around measurement. And I have mixed feelings around measurement for D&I. One of them is that you have to measure what we expect. The other one is that, it does kind of potentially put some false barriers there. So I'm curious what the panel thinks about measurement, and is that something what can we measure, and how could we measure that in order to be able to measure our success for D&I in the industry?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think one of the issues that I have seen is that measurement is, we're not comparing apples to apples. And so that is probably the major issue. So one company talks about, let's say, their percentage of executives, but an executive in one company is not necessarily an executive in another. So it becomes a very sort of complicated issue from that perspective. But that is probably the first thing that comes to mind for me. And I see, do you have an answer? Oh.
Can I just interject? So yes. I'm a strategic planner. Analytics, metrics is just part of what I do. I do believe, though, that individual organizations need to set some metrics.
Absolutely.
And I know, I will just put this out there, that I know HR gets very nervous. We've had conversations about it. And we have set certain goals, right, that we want to reach. But as a person that this is very important to, I'm very active not only in the industry on the topic, but internally at my own organization. I am pushing for measurement, knowing that it is not going to be easy, knowing that we'll have to, see how things are panning out. But I do think we have to look especially at retention figures, because I do see that as a big, we cannot seem to retain. And how do we figure that out? You got to measure it and test things and see if they're having impact. So I am all for measurement with, knowing that we're not going to get it perfect, but you got to start measuring somewhere.
Yeah, and I didn't address the internal measurement. We've been doing that forever. And so it's really important to us to measure how we're doing in terms of hiring, how we're doing in terms of promotions, and how we're doing in terms of overall participation, which is basically like a snapshot in time of your population. So who are they on, let's say, September 30th, 2018, which could change on October 1st, but at least you have that. And we do that quarterly, and I actually look more frequently than that to see how we're doing and to course correct if we need to. So I do think that it is much easier for organizations to figure out their own internal measurements. It's the industry part that becomes extraordinarily complicated.